Today, we're diving into a powerful opening trap Bobby Fischer used to beat the world's third best player in just 10 moves. I'll also show you how to apply this tactic in common openings. To challenge anyone, let's jump into the game of Fischer, playing white against Larsen, playing black. Larsen is certainly a very strong opponent. He's been one of the world's top players for a really extended period of time. He played a couple of semi-final world championship matches, etc., so that is certainly a decent opponent. Now here, we're going into the Alekhine defense, the classic operation, and here Larsen goes for this exchange in the center and plays knight to d7. A move that certainly makes sense. White's threat on e5 is strong, so black just wants to trade it off. So far, so good, but that's the point where Fischer played a move, knight takes f7. In this case, it seems like a very strange and unusual way for white to start an attack while the rest of white's army is still completely undeveloped. And yet, knight f7 is actually a common tactical idea. Just think about fried liver attack, for example. Right? So that's a common pattern because this pawn on f7 is only defended by the king, making it the weakest point of black's position. As soon as you remove that pawn on f7, you get direct access to the opponent's king and to attacking. For example, right now, this is a fork to black's king and knight, and for that reason, the king has to move forward to defend the knight. Otherwise, white will continue the attack and capture the knight on the next move as well. So the way to go for black is king e6. As much as it seems dangerous to keep the king in the center of the board, at least it defends the knight. And black keeps their material advantage. What should Fischer do now? Well, he played queen g4 check. Black moved the king back to f7, then queen h5. So far, it's a repetition. After the king goes to e6 and queen g4, Larsen refused to repeat moves. I don't know what Fischer's plan was here. Was he okay with getting a draw in this game? Or would he have played some other move and pressed on? We'll never know because, in this position, instead of repeating by playing king to f7, Larsen played king to d6, and reportedly, at this point, he told Fischer, "Now I'm playing for a win." Well, let's see. Fischer played pawn to c4. This attacks the knight, and suddenly black is already in quite a bit of trouble because the knight can't easily retreat. If the knight goes back to f6, which didn't happen in the game, Larsen played another move. I'll show why black can't save the knight easily. White simply keeps pushing c5, and after king d6, this leads to a nice little checkmate, since this square is covered by the bishop. So this is actually a checkmate. For this reason, after Fischer played pawn to c4, black decided to keep the knight here and instead moved the other knight to f6, opening up an attack on white's queen, which definitely needs to retreat. So Fischer played queen g3, the queen retreats with check, gaining tempo. The king moves to e6. And now white can happily regain the piece sacrificed a few moves ago. Queen takes d5, the material balance is restored. It is currently equal and the position is very complicated. Of course, the centralized king is situated very dangerously, but it only takes one move. If only black could have one loop to drop it back to f7. The position would become absolutely unclear and normal. And so, Fischer's plan here is just to keep attacking at every turn so that black never has the time to move the king back. And so, instead of defending this pawn, Fischer just plays knight c3, offering this pawn sacrifice. Black thought, well, there's not much to do anyway, let's capture the pawn. Now bishop e3, now white develops a bishop with tempo and still hits the queen. The queen went here to b4, and at this point, again, it seems not super clear how white should continue an attack. Again, let's not forget that black is always ready to drop the king back. But Fischer played a brave move, pawn to a3. This looks dangerous at first because it allows black to not just retreat with the queen but instead to capture this pawn on b2, attacking the rook and the knight. But Fischer calculated this. Bishop c4 check first is the counterblow check to the king. The king now cannot go back because it's all under the fire of the bishop, so the king has to go back to d7. But now, rook d1. So the rook comes off this attack and joins the party, hitting the king. The king has to go back to e8, and after knight b5, black simply resigned because now knight takes c7 is imminent, which would actually be a checkmate. The rook controls this line and the bishop controls this diagonal. Knight takes c7 would also fork the king and the rook, therefore, white really has just way too many threats here. Quite a disastrous opening for black. And, of course, at first, it may seem like black played not the mainstream opening, the Alekhine defense, and even the sideline of the Alekhine defense. But, as promised, let me share with you how you can use the exact same tactical motif in the most popular variations. So let's start off with the move knight to f3. Our idea is to drag your opponent into the Tennyson gambit in a way they don't expect this to happen now, since this knight hits this square. Black can't easily play e5 anymore, or else this pawn will simply be captured, and for that reason, the top move for black here is pawn d5, playing another pawn to the center of the board. Now, all of a sudden, instead of all the common moves, you play the gambit-style pawn e4, offering this pawn, and certainly, pretty much everybody will capture it. Now you go knight g5, aiming to grab the pawn back, and therefore, it's only natural for black to defend the pawn by playing knight to f6, and that's the most played move here. We will continue with pawn d3, providing one more attack on this pawn, but black thinks, hey, I'm happy to trade it off, I'm still ahead. And the overwhelming majority of your opponents will capture it. Now bishop takes d3. You've got a little bit of an advantage in development for the pawn sacrifice, and as you can see, the top move of black, which is, really by far the most popular compared to many other options, it's significantly more popular, is pawn h6. Which is a losing mistake because that allows the exact same tactical motif. Knight takes f7, sacrificing to draw out the king, and as soon as that happens in this case, we utilize another tactical motif, a discovered attack. Bishop g6 delivers check to the king, but at the same time, it also hits black's queen. So the point of this whole gambit is that, in the end, you can grab the queen and keep the opponent's king exposed at the very same time. Therefore, that is definitely easily winning for white. You're attacking here a lot of things. And the king is still exposed, and, of course, that should be easily winning. So, that's the first way for you to utilize the same opening trap used by Fischer. But in a way where you drag your opponent into this territory regardless of what opening they were planning to play against. Let me share with you the second way for you to utilize this opening trap against anybody. So we start off in the most standard way, pawn e4, pawn e5, now knight f3, knight to c6. And here you're going for the Scotch gambit initially. But after pawn takes, instead of recapturing, all of a sudden your knight changes its mind and goes knight to g5. Your opponent thinks this pressure is somewhat annoying. What if white goes bishop c4 to hit the pawn? The top choice of black is pawn h6, and now you sacrifice the knight on f7. As you can see, it gives you the overwhelming 70% win rate versus 28% win rate for black. So knight f7, king takes is forced, now bishop c4 check. The same idea, we expose the king and start attacking it afterwards. Here, the top choice of black, the most popular move, is king e8, which is a forced checkmate in just a few moves. That's how deadly this trap actually is. After king e8, we just go queen h5, followed by queen to f7, and this is somewhat similar to the scholar's checkmate. Actually, even if your opponent is smart enough not to get into the trap, let me take this move back. Let's say your opponent plays the proper move, king to e7 here. Alright, in this case, if we're turning on Stockfish, it shows us -3, meaning black is a piece up and should be completely winning. But if you look at the stats, for example, if you play the move I recommend, pawn to c3, white simply keeps playing in the gambit style. Now, you cannot just have a forced checkmate, but you can keep attacking long term. After you play the move pawn to c3, white has a 53% win rate versus black's 44%, so white won more games than black, even though Stockfish says it's completely winning for black. So I would not blindly believe Stockfish's evaluation. Defending this position as black in a real-life game is certainly not as easy, especially if it's a blitz game. So I think that even with the correct move of black, king e7, you still have good attacking chances, but most of your opponents will actually go king d8 and run right into the trap with queen f7. King to d6, bishop f4 check, and within a couple of moves, you finish it off with something like king to d6 and queen b5 checkmate. Thanks for watching.